Hello, we've a rather special Wild Track for you today because we're turning the whole programme over to a sort of behind-the-scenes look at the BBC's major new natural history series, Life on Earth. Later on, Sue will be showing you some of the camera equipment that was used to capture animals on film. Pictures like the ones you may remember from a trailer that was shown several weeks ago.
The abundance, diversity, and apparent extravagance of life around us is a never-ending source of enjoyment and amazement. But why should life occur in so many forms? And how and in what order did they all evolve? Clearly, ants must have come before anteaters, trees before monkeys, flowers before insects. Or did they? I shall be trying to answer such questions in a new series tracing the story of life on Earth from its very beginnings to the arrival of man. It's a story that spans over 3,500 million years. But although we shall look for clues among some of the world's most beautiful and important fossils, most of the story will be told by the plants and animals that live around us today. They've been filmed in over 40 countries during the past 3 years by the BBC Natural History Unit in the most ambitious project of its kind ever undertaken for television.
Well, that's a familiar voice. We've already seen 7 of the 13 programmes, and it's clear that they're building up into a tremendous success. And so today, in the studio, we've got a special guest, David Attenborough, the man who's written and presented the series. David, welcome to Wild Track.
Thank you very much.
It really must have been quite a big job.
The biggest job I've ever been involved in. It took us 3 years, as I said. We had about 6 cameramen working for most of those times, so that's 18 cameraman years, so no one-man cameraman could possibly have made it, really, in any practical terms. That's a pile of film that was shot just for one programme, for programme 4, as it were, and we just went almost everywhere you can think of.
So the editors had a colossal job.
Oh, how they actually found where all these thousands of shots were, no, hundreds of thousands of shots, certainly, I really don't know. At least I know in theory, but they never lost one.
And from all over the world, yes?
Yes, we went east and west and south and way up to the north.
Let's start at the very top. Why did you go to Iceland?
Well, I agree. There's not much there but birds, except that the land of Iceland, which is volcanic and covered in volcanic sands, is very like the world must have been before life emerged from the seas onto the land. So we used Iceland to give a picture of the continents of the Earth right at a very, very early period when there was really nothing, not even a vestige of plant on land.
It looks fearsome.
Well, it is, and the trouble is, of course, that when you start trying to film with volcanoes, they are even less predictable than animals.
Oh.
The volcanoes of today are mere feeble
1066, take 3 M-board.
So you had a little local difficulty there. It isn't only Dick Emery who gets into trouble on location, eh? It must have been a great comfort working with film crews that you know.
Oh, yes. Well, not only were there these 6 crews, as I mentioned, there was one particular crew which was extremely important as far as I was concerned, and that was Maurice Fisher, cameraman, and Lyndon Bird, who was the recordist, and the 3 of us, together with an assistant cameraman and other people, travelled as a group. And so we got to know one another pretty well, and they would tell me when I was saying things that weren't at all clear. And we had a very good time together. That's Maurice Fisher on the right, holding that heavy camera on mules. And as you know as well as I do, whenever you go on these trips, there are always this little group of people that the viewer never normally sees. What they see is just a beautiful shot of the Grand Canyon, in this case taken from the air, and then us, or rather me, just going down, and we're going down the Grand Canyon, which is a mile deep, in order to go and find the very, very earliest rocks which lie right at the bottom of this huge cleft, because obviously the rocks right at the bottom are the ones that were laid down first. And so as you go down, you can look at the fossils and see that they change their character as you go down. And by and large, they get simpler and simpler, so that at the top they're reptiles, but then you don't see anything but fish, and finally you don't see anything at all. You come to a time when there really no fossil evidence of anything, and that's the beginning of the Earth.
And the overall design of the film is a sort of journey from the beginnings of life.
That's the way we do it, though, of course, every stage of life has actually left some relics in the world, so that you can not only you can take the fossils, but you can also find things which illustrate them and shows how they were when they were alive.
So you went to the frozen Arctic and the depths of the desert and so on. You went to a lot of different places, but presumably you didn't make the films in a sequence.
No, you can't, of course, because if you go, let us say, to South America, you've got to do amphibians, and you've got to do birds, and you've got to do snakes, and so you all higgledy-piggledy, and you've got to remember to try and get them in the right order. I mean, we went actually to South America, for example, to look for little frogs up in Guyana.
This is
right
over
at
here.
the top there, yes. And those frogs were going to be in programme, number 6. And in the beautiful Kaitoa Falls, in the forest there's an absolutely marvellous place for frogs, because those falls produce great spray which swirls through the forest, so everywhere is damp, and there is water in the bottom of those plants, and in that live these little tiny frogs. We wanted to show that that's one of the problems of frogs, about getting enough water. But so then we went right on farther south and skipped about 6 programmes to this place, which is an enormous cave. And it was in this cave, at the end of the last century, that people found the remains of a most extraordinary ground sloth, a huge animal about as big as an elephant, but related to the sloth, which hangs down upside down from trees today, and which was thought to be extinct. But then in this cave in Patagonia, they found some bits of skin and some bones and actually some droppings which really look as though they had been dropped about, a few years ago. And the question was this animal still alive? You can see from the skin it really looks as though it could have come from an animal that was living only a few years ago. But in fact, the animal, I'm afraid, is extinct. But near there, you see, having filmed that for programme 12, we then had to go back and film for programme 6 this little creature, which is found in these beech forests, which is called Darwin's frog. And we wanted to find that because of all the frogs in the world, this particular one has the most extraordinary mating techniques. I mean, quite unbelievable.
It is an extraordinary-looking creature, isn't it?
Ah, and that's not the half of it.
But, I mean, you went there. Isn't one of the great problems to be in the right place at the right time? You know, whenever you go somewhere, people always say, you should have come last week. And you travelled great distances. You know, you went a long way with experienced film crews, but you can never be sure that animals are going to perform before your cameras.
You've had the same experiences as I have.
It has happened.
Well, in that instance.
And your frog, I mean, you went there and there it was,
Yes.
this lovely creature to look at. But what
Yeah.
does it do?
Well, it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, that is for sure. And Lyndon Bird, the sound recordist, actually got a tin, and in this instance, because the frog's so small, we got a few of them, and were able to bring them back very carefully by air, keeping them cool with blocks of ice, and give them to Roger Jackman. Roger Jackman is a specialist cameraman who lives near Bristol, in Paignton, in fact, and it was he who had the fantastic job of trying to watch this frog, because this frog, which is a male frog, actually has the young hatching within its vocal sac. And he was waiting for the moment when that frog would come out of the male's mouth, which is so extraordinary, and he waited for 140 hours, taking turns with his assistant, watching the frogs for that one moment, because if he presses the button on the camera, as we both know, after it's happened, it's too late. So Roger watched, and eventually he got a shot which I don't think anybody had ever seen before, certainly no scientist had ever seen before, and certainly I hadn't seen before.
So you told him what you were hoping would happen.
Yes.
And he waited in the hope that something would happen.
And there's the frog, and what we were expecting was a baby to be hatched out of that frog's mouth. Now, isn't that fantastic? Let's show it to you again. The male has swallowed the baby when it was an egg, and it's hatched in his sac, and out it comes. A really extraordinary thing to see.
Oh, it's a sensational piece of film. And I suppose a good example of the sort of time and effort that you were prepared to spend on the thing.
Well, the cameraman did anyway.
Yeah. I suppose there must have been a lot of occasions when you needed special expertise and sophisticated equipment. Now, that's something that Sue Ingle is especially interested in.
Well, if you're nervous about spiders, I suggest you give the next couple of minutes a miss. Mind you, I hope you don't, because some of the sequences are incredible. In Australia, Denzi Klein and Jim Frazier of Mantis Films are special experts at filming spiders and all sorts of insects. They're out on one of the hunts for a Life on Earth sequence. And here, Denzi's found just what she's looking for: the web of a large Australian bird-eating spider that's lurking out of sight in that crevice. The first thing to do is film its natural habitat, and Jim takes the shot before Denzi moves in very carefully to collect the spider. They're hoping to film the intricate details of how this species spins its web, and it's just too dark here to be able to film in close-up. These spiders have a very nasty bite, so a long pair of forceps is used to gently coax the spider into a carrying box. And without, of course, damaging it in any way. Back in their studio, a small filming set has already been prepared. Jim makes some final adjustments to the spider's temporary home. And quite readily, it takes up residence in a new home that's almost exactly like its old one. And filming can start now under the artificial lights that give the brightness that's needed to film in very big close-up. The focus here is really critical. And this is what they filmed: shimmering strands of silk from the spinnerets of the bird-eating spider. A lot of film in the first 4 programmes was shot by Oxford's Scientific Films, and one of their cameramen who travelled a great deal is Peter Parks. Hello, Peter.
Hello, Sue.
Where exactly did you go on your travels?
Well, Chris Parsons, who was the executive producer for this series, was very keen that we tried to pick up some of the extraordinary animal life that occurred on the Great Barrier Reef. So Australia was really the first port of call, and there much of our time was spent working with specialist equipment.
We can see here you are on the Barrier Reef, wading out to have a look at some of the little animals.
That's quite right. We were after sea slugs, nudibranchs in this case, and we were using a piece of equipment which we call a periscope. A periscope normally looks out of water from beneath, and in this case we're looking from out of water into water.
And what are the advantages of using a periscope like this?
I think the main advantage is the fact that you can operate relatively free of disturbance of the animals. You have only the legs of the tripod, your own toes, and the bottom of the periscope, and this gives you quite an advantage.
How deep is the water? I mean, that was just sort of knee-deep there.
Yes, indeed. It's designed to work in shallow, clear water.
And
the sorts of animals we were looking at there are some of these beautiful, incredibly bizarre sea slugs with these fantastic colours. Many of the colours are probably warning colours, in fact, because many of them are distasteful.
They really are incredible, aren't they? And how big would those be, in fact?
They vary from anything from about 1/4 of an inch long up to 3, 4, even 5 inches long. Some of the biggest can be. They glide on these incredible muscular feet, almost effortlessly. There seems to be no reason or no means of locomotion. And this one, this is an incredible one. It has this appearance of a flickering flame.
Ah, is this still Australia now?
No, this is later in the trip when we travelled 12,000 miles right round to the other side of the world, and we were in Bermuda collecting freshwater samples in this case. We were operating on a little island, the island of Nonsuch, off the coast of Bermuda, and the family was still with me, and I think they were enjoying every minute of it.
And what have you got there? Oh, now we've moved on.
We're, in fact, they're just trying to set up a very small set, which is going to be filmed with a microscopic system, which is going to allow us to take a very close look at some of those incredibly small animals, many of which are completely invisible to the naked eye because they're so small. Some of them are so small that they're not only smaller than the head of a pin, they're a good deal smaller than the point of a pin. In fact, you could get 50, 100, possibly even 1,000 onto the space occupied by the very tip of a pin.
And all the equipment we're looking at there, well, what are all those bits and pieces?
Well, a lot of the shiny material there is lighting equipment. There's a very complicated micro zoom system, and the whole thing is on a piece of equipment which weighs 4.5 hundredweight. And this was one of the problems on this particular trip. We were travelling with nearly 2 tons of equipment.
It looks like you're about to drive a car there. What's that wheel for?
Well, the hand wheels, and there are 4 of them, 5 of them in fact, those are there for controlling the position of the specimen. So if the animal swims off to the left, the tank or the small set in which it is contained has to be moved to the right, and so we keep it in frame.
And now you're focusing, are you?
That's focusing and adjusting exposure. And here we're looking at an animal which is incredibly small. It is, as I say, smaller than the point of a pin. They occur in fresh water in vast numbers, and 1 or 2 of these are actually even new to science. We came across some amazing creatures on this particular trip.
Well, from photographing animals which move underwater, let's take a look at creatures which move through the air very quickly. And I'm talking about insects. Peter, you've taken a lot of shots of insects. What are the main problems when you're taking photographs of things that fly so fast?
Well, with fast-moving, fast-flying animals, one has to have a camera that can match their speed. This means transport the film through the mechanics fast enough so that when we see the finished film, it looks as if the animal is moving either reasonably or very slowly. And for this, we use a high-speed camera, and this particular one here allows us to go up to a frame rate of 10,000 frames a second.
Well, what's that compared with a normal film camera?
Well, a normal film camera, one of these we've got behind us here, would normally be run at 24, 25 frames a second. So we're talking about a speed very considerably greater than that.
And what are the main problems perhaps with light?
Well, as you guessed, for a camera of this sort, where the frame rate is so fast, you've got to have a lot of light. And a lot of light produces a lot of heat, and a lot of heat can be harmful. So it's absolutely essential that somehow we manage to reduce this heat.
And you don't have any insect deaths, do you?
No, this is something that we've worked on fairly hard in the last year to try to make certain that at the end of the shot, the insect is just as happy, as alive anyway, as it was when we started.
Well, this is the camera which has taken some really rather extraordinary shots of rather ordinary insects. Oh, what's this, Peter?
This is a daddy longlegs.
Very unusual view. What's that sort of drums, or those drumsticks in the background?
Those little drumsticks are balance organs, and they're in fact the modified hind wings.
Oh, and what's this one?
That's just a perfectly ordinary bluebottle.
Really? From an unusual angle?
Yes, you can see the drumsticks also, little things behind the main wings there.
Also has balancing. And this, what's this?
This is a hoverfly. From this particular angle you can't see those drumsticks, but of course this insect is the insect best able to hover.
Thank you, Peter, for coming along. Very
It's
interesting.
a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, we've looked at the problems of filming small animals, but of course you have just as many difficulties when you're filming larger animals. And one of the main ones is getting close enough. So to get decent pictures, you really need to use telephoto lenses, which can magnify up to 24 times. These powerful lenses are a great help for the wildlife cameraman, but they have to find the animals first. In Tanzania, East Africa, BBC cameraman Martin Saunders and director Mike Salisbury have found a herd of wildebeest. A four-wheel drive vehicle is needed for this rough country, and the Land Rover makes a good hide as well. The animals don't take much notice once they're used to the vehicle, and may even come within a few feet. Sometimes the cameramen work in pairs. Here, Hugh Miles has a really close view of a pride of lions after a kill. And the Land Rover can easily move him around so that he can film from different positions. But even a lens as sophisticated as this doesn't do everything. Precise focusing is essential to get really sharp pictures. But patience and perseverance and knowing how the animals will behave are even more important qualities for the top wildlife cameramen.
David, I must ask you, what was the most memorable location?
Well, I think it was one for me that I think you got to before I did. I only got there last year, and I think you were there long before, and that's the Galapagos. You were there, weren't you?
Yes, and certainly the most exciting trip I ever had with Peter Scott, yes.
Well, I thought it absolutely breathtaking. I'm sure it's still as wonderful as it was when you were there.
And the most interesting encounter?
Oh, there's no question about that. We were lucky enough to actually become involved with a family of mountain gorillas on the border of Rwanda and Zaire, the Congo. And that is something I will never, ever forget.
But you were actually with them?
Oh, yes, we actually sat amongst them. And at one stage, there was one actually sitting on my feet and thumping me with his fist. It was quite unbelievable.
That must have been tremendous. Yeah. And what are the other highlights we've got to look forward to in the rest of the series?
Well, of course, we've now actually, in the course of the series, got onto land. The amphibians, those lovely frogs which we saw 2 weeks ago, showed some of the problems that backbone animals have of living on land with wet skins, which is a bit of a problem. That was over a week ago, and then last week you saw the reptiles with waterproof skins, laying eggs, and this extraordinary behaviour of the crocodiles. And now to come, there's a programme about birds, and then there's a programme about the primitive mammals, including such things as the anteater. Then there's hunters and hunted, carnivores, these are cheetahs. And finally, there are the primates, the group to which we belong, starting with lemurs, like the Sifaka in Madagascar, and these marvellous gorillas.
So the truth is, then, on Tuesday evenings and Sunday evenings, we've got the best of it to come. We've got the birds and the mammals still to be seen.
You're prejudiced.
And not only all those lovely films, but you've gone to a great deal of effort to do this tremendous book, Life on Earth, which is full of good pictures, Sue.
Oh, it certainly is. It's got a great variety of animals, and I'm pleased to see plants as well.
Just a few.
David, thank you very much for sparing us time to come here for Wild Track.